Welcome to the Humans and Earth podcast. We bring you inspiration and practical resources for healing our planet and ourselves. It's time for soulful contributions that regenerate life on Earth. I'm Shara Arman, a thought leader and teacher who believes we're ready to renew Earth and heal ourselves in the process. You can find our work online at humansandearth.com and on Instagram at School Humans Earth. I'd love for you to be on our newsletter list and receive our updates on Instagram. Please share our work at the School for Humans and Earth with anyone you think might be interested, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to this podcast so that we can include more and more people in the regeneration revolution that I believe is happening on planet Earth. Welcome to today's episode. Welcome back to Humans and Earth. I am so happy today to bring you a conversation with Kate Neligan. Kate is an equine-partnered life and business coach, healer, and animal communicator whose life work is devoted to the human-animal bond. Kate pairs her intuitive gifts with those of horses and goats to help people access their own inner power and connect to their life purpose. She works with both high-performing women and companies in developing mindful cultures through team building and leadership retreats. Kate has a master's in spiritual psychology and is certified in equine experiential education. She's the creator of Awakening with Equines, a first-of-its-kind certification program for equine-partnered facilitators. She also created an Awakening with Equines card deck that highlights horse wisdom. In addition, Kate has been published in 6 best-selling books and has a TEDx talk on perfectionism. To learn more about Kate's work, you can go to kateneligan.com. That's Neligan, and that will be in our show notes for today. Welcome, Kate. I'm so happy to be in conversation with you.
Thank you. Me too. Thanks for having me.
So I have been really interested in the human-animal connection for a long time. And I've interviewed other people on this podcast, as I mentioned to you, who also do really special work with animals. So listeners can go back to the interview with Cara Gubbins and Kate Solisti, and there are several others. When I heard you interviewed recently on a podcast, I was so moved and intrigued. I was aware of equine assisted or equine partnered coaching, but just hearing your stories about it really lit me up, and I knew I wanted to talk with you. So in order to introduce our listeners to what it is you do and this kind of magic that you help facilitate between horses and goats and humans, can you tell us maybe a story about how this work unfolds? And then we'll also hear more about how you got into this work in the first place.
Yeah, I love starting with story because it's what connects us in so many ways to hear other people's stories. So one of my favorites was, somewhat early actually in my coaching practice with the horses. And I had a woman come who was in entertainment. And I used to be in that field and very driven, and she was as well. And she didn't even know if she liked horses. She just wanted to try alternative ways of healing and coaching. And she was really in that place in life where she just was very unfulfilled, like haven't had a relationship for a long time, didn't necessarily love her work, and really was stuck and was like, I'm willing to try anything. And we did some really powerful inner child work with two minis, so really small horses. And she just fell in love with one of the horses so much. She ended up putting the photo on her phone to remind her. But I feel like minis often have us do that inner child work where we go back in and we're healing the parts that maybe didn't receive the love or attention or acknowledgement that they needed when they were younger that are still part of us, right? Or that we've maybe internalized. And so we did, a really powerful session. And then she came back for more and was just changing so fast. And I'm like, what are you doing? And she's like, nothing but this. And I'm like, oh, that's really incredible that you are literally just learning and receiving the love of the horses and the like work I'm trained in from my master's program in spiritual psychology to really embrace and love yourself for the first time, right? Reparent yourself for the first time and be the mother and the dad that you needed for yourself. And then very quickly, she found her partner, she got married, she had a kid, she got a promotion, she started to, change a lot of her life, all her self-care, and was just so much happier. And like very quickly did not need coaching anymore because everything was just going so well. So I was really impressed with that change and transformation and success. And, just through the power of love and forgiveness and self-compassion.
So, listening to you talk about that, one question that comes up for me is what's different about doing this in the presence of horses? Because you could be doing one-on-one coaching, as thousands or millions of coaches do, two humans working together on somebody's development. What changes or what is different when you're doing this outdoors with horses or goats?
Yeah, I love that question. I do a lot of virtual coaching without the horses too. And so I'm very attuned to knowing the differences between those. So, first and foremost, I think the horses make me a better facilitator because I am feeling their unconditional love and presence and groundedness that they offer, being four-legged prey animals, and that we get when we're outside in nature. So, me being out in nature, being an earth type and sign and all of that, and then getting the transference of the energy from the horses. Their hearts are 5 times the size of ours, and that electromagnetic field and all of them. I'm a better facilitator, first and foremost. Second of all, the client is receiving all of that. So they're getting not just my facilitation, but the facilitation of really the horses and all that they offer. So they're getting experiential learning and they're getting kinesthetic touch, which can also help regulate the nervous system. And so they're also using all of their senses, right? And sometimes I have like really high performing women that I coach and I'm like, are you on your computer? Get off your computer, pay attention. But they're trying to still multitask, right? And then you cannot multitask when you're outside with a 1,200-pound animal that could hurt you. So you have to get really present. And people just find their emotions come up to the surface very quickly with horses. And we're very good at masking a lot of that as humans, right? Of being able to push our emotions aside when we're talking to other humans, but it's like the horses see right through it. I call them great BS detectors, belief system and bullshit detectors. So you can't hide really at all around them.
Yeah, I've heard that. I heard a story from a friend who was on a retreat participating in equine partnered coaching. And I think they were walking around the ring in the presence of the horses, stating goals out loud. And she stated a goal that she wasn't aware how much inner conflict she was still associating with. And the horse accompanying her just stopped. And she said it was such a revelation because, she's going along in the ring, stating out loud her goals. And then suddenly the horse is no longer walking with her. And it revealed to her that she was actually not in alignment with that goal. She wanted to be, but she wasn't. And that story really stuck with me, thinking about what it would be like to experience that with, as you said, a massive animal that is so beautiful and seems to open human hearts maybe partly because its own heart field is so gigantic.
Yeah. Yeah. So well said. I've done some of that work where both for myself and with clients where we are stating out intentions or even just like describing a vision and seeing if the horses stay with us and seeing if there's congruence, right, in that, or there's areas where, like, usually when people have a hard time making a decision, if they're at a changing point in their life between two different like paths, career paths, or even a relationship, stay or go, right, they will talk it out and walk it out. And if the horse is right there with them, if they're in alignment and they'll stop or they'll walk away or they'll even give you like side eye or, there's lots of different things that they can do to reflect to us. Like the energy's changed now. It's different, with this other choice or decision. I once had a client actually ask out loud, like she was going to go into this new job and she's like, are they heart-centered? And the mare, just the female horse I was working with, she looked at her, she looked at me, and she took a hard turn away and walked away. And I was like, be prepared that, you can go into this company, but you're not necessarily going to have that heart-centeredness that you're seeking, So it's very interesting what happens.
What do you think this is like for the horses? I don't know if you can answer this, but do you think they experience this as doing with us really remedial work that is kind of obvious to them and we're like the preschoolers? Or do you think it's not like that for them, that they experience us as something more like peers with weaknesses or deficits?
Yeah, this is such a great discussion. Because I do think that it ranges. So I think there are times, and I'll always use myself because I put myself through years of this with, before I even started doing this work, I was receiving coaching and then I was receiving equine assisted therapy, even as recently as a few years ago, because I feel like it's so powerful. And the more that I receive it, I also, can be a better facilitator. And I have horses that work me every single day. So yes, there are times when I feel like they think this is remedial, that we could have, should have, would have gotten it already. And it's not that they judge us, but they have a little bit of like, it can be almost like an impatience or an energy of like, can you get with the program? And so I'll see them sigh out. I'll see them like, what happens is I'll see them walk away or I'll see them even like stop offering something if a client isn't receiving it. So a lot of people want to touch their faces. They just want to like, and I'm like, that's not necessarily what the horse wants. The horse wants to contribute to you. Can you stand, breathe, open your arms and just receive? And they just want to touch. And a horse is like, I can't help you if all you're doing is touching my face. So I will actually ask people to just stand, breathe, and receive. And then they're like, oh, I can feel energy in my body. And I'm like, there you go. And then they'll see where the horse will specifically go to a part of their body that's in pain. And so I think the horses love doing the work when people are very receptive, very open. They're willing to drop down into their hearts. I often do meditations with them, so the work goes deeper faster. But if people just want to talk, I mean, my one mare, certain clients, if people just wanted to talk and talk and talk, like talk therapy, she would look at me and go, it's yours, bye. And she'd walk away and stand and outside. And she would just not be that interested until the client was really willing to go deeper or have an emotional shift. So they don't want to process us when there's just a ton of talking, and you can go into a therapist's office and talk your heart out, talk your mouth off if you want that experience. The horses want to do more embodied energy work and really, get the emotions and the heart cleared up. So
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's really compelling to me. When they give attention to particular parts of people's bodies, what do the horses tell you they're doing, or what do you or clients perceive that is happening?
Yeah, so I did not know that they were energy workers. Well, first of all, I didn't even know that they could coach and teach and all of that. I grew up riding. I was competitive. I had no idea that any of this existed until I started witnessing it with those receiving treatment for addiction in rehab facilities. And I was watching them basically come back into their bodies and come back into hope. And so I was like, wow, what are the horses actually doing? This is really powerful. Then I would watch them put their heads up to people's hearts or push down gently on someone's shoulder. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like originally people just think they're being loving or kind or sweet and all that until I had a master level energy worker horse who was like, stop touching me one day, she said to me, and just stand there and receive. And then I started to feel stuff in my body. And I've always been like clairaudient where I can hear and I'm intuitive that way, but I don't think I had a lot of clairsentience because I lived so much in my head. So when I stood there and just breathed with her, I started to feel changes in my body. I started to feel tension dissolve. I started to feel like vibration of energy, and I started to feel good. And so I would then start to track, okay, where do I have tension or pain today? Like if I have a headache. And then if I stand and breathe with the horse, is it completely gone? And it is, you know? And then I started to ask other clients, what are you experiencing? What are you feeling? When I watched the horses do that, and they would tell me, like, well, she just spent a long time on my leg, and that's what I hurt in the car accident I was in, or, and they would tell me different things that they were going through that map to where the horse was working. And then I would hear, see, or feel information too. Like once, my horse was working on someone and I was like, what is she doing around her feet? And then I realized she was almost removing like energetic balls and chains that client had to the ancestral lineage and the families. And I'm like, that her family. And I'm like, wow, that is really. And then I heard that, within a couple of days, that client had stood up to a parent that she could never have stood up to before. And just that kind of stuff. So I knew that they were doing things from my own personal experience and then asking clients. And then, I will talk to the horses too. And sometimes they'll say like this, this person is going through this or that's happening. And they don't always give me a ton of information about what is healing because we don't need to get into the story of it. We just want it to move and change, really.
So profound. So before we started recording, you mentioned that you started in a corporate career. How did you get into this work?
Yeah, I got very lucky. It found me. I had been in marketing in the movie studio world for a while. And one day I was walking down the hall and I saw my colleague had a beautiful, gray horse photo in her room. And I went in and I was like, do you have a horse? And she's like, I do. And I was like, that's amazing because I grew up riding and it's been a while it's been like 10 years since I've been off of riding and I want to get back into it. And she's like, oh, why don't you come ride where I am? And the, short story of it is I set a really powerful intention to be connected to horse and I was. And then I went out there and I was leasing this horse named Butterfly who just started to change my world. And then I followed my friend to another ranch when she went, and that's where my first mentor was doing equine assisted therapy. She was trained in it and was like a lifelong horsewoman. And I just was her apprentice. I just watched, I absorbed, I sponged it all up until I started doing it on my own. And then I went and got a ton of training too. So yeah, it's been fun. It's just been this journey of studying and then teaching. And like, Wayne Dyer always used to say, that Hay House author, he would say he would get so much opportunity in life because anything he studied, he was willing to teach. And it was that cycle. And so for me, I feel like it's been the same. Like I just always am a student of the horse, and then I do my best to share about them as often as I can too, just to give them a voice and a platform and talk about them in this way, the way that you understand and are curious about, because it's much more than just putting them through obstacle courses for humans understanding. It's really about partnering with the horses and their gifts, their evolved, very evolved gifts.
I love how you said that because I think a lot about how, more and more people are starting to realize we're just at the beginning of our awareness of what's going on in the natural world, well, in our own bodies, minds, and souls as well. But, many ancient and indigenous peoples knew these things, but modern peoples are just at the beginning, modern industrialized peoples, just at the beginning of recognizing or remembering there is so much more going on in this world than we typically understand, whether it's with plant intelligence and plant communication or these incredibly vast capacities that animals have. And I'm always really excited to see scientists like Mark Bekoff who are actually pursuing that, in their own way within the scientific realm. But then it's also so exciting to see, I think, quite a lot of professionals like you now, whether they're animal communicators or doing equine partnered work or dog partnered work, really starting to remember and show other people there is so much more to animals and their capacities and their gifts and their ability to partner with us. It's kind of mind blowing when you start to think about how much we don't know and how many more connections and partnerships we can be stepping into.
Oh yeah, so well said. And I feel too that they're just waiting, right? Like, and I hear that a
Yes.
lot. People will say when I come in to be trained, my horses are waiting for me to be ready. My horses are waiting for me to get it. And I like tuned into the trees on our property one day and they finally were like, we're chakra trees. And I'm like, what? And I had been there for years and not talking to the trees and not ready for that or willing to even think that I could have a relationship with trees. And then it's been so beautiful and incredibly deep and healing. Like sometimes I go to them for the healing and I know like to work with their branches and like move some energy that way. And it's so fast and so powerful. And, it just, I had to be ready for it. They were waiting for
They
me.
are waiting. I appreciate that you said that. That's something I've talked about in the last year or so because I keep hearing that from, I tend to connect a little bit more often with plants than with animals, although I have a dog I'm really devoted to. But they're just waiting for us to wake up and engage. And that's exciting. I think a lot of things have shifted on the planet and for humanity in the last, well, depends whether you want to date it to years or decades or centuries, all of that is true, but there's just so much possibility.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. And I feel like it can feel really out there, woo woo, or awkward at first because this is not like but it's like didn't social media at first, right? When we had to learn that, and now we're so used to it. Our phones, like we didn't have iPhones, we didn't have phones in our hands, and it took a minute to get used to that. But now we love that technology and how much it helps us and supports us. And it's the same, like animals, nature, plants. Like it might take a minute to be like, oh yeah, like this is something that it's incredibly beneficial. And maybe I don't know a lot of people that are doing this, but there are others out there. At first, I felt like I was on an island until I started to find my herd and then start to build and continue to build the herd through my Facebook group. But I was like, there's just, we can be with that awkwardness when we start. And then there is that ancient remembering, if we believe in past lives, of like having done a lot of this before and knowing that we used to live on the land and be always fully connected to the cycles of nature and and it's a remembering,
Yeah.
more than anything.
We all come from that heritage. Every single human being alive, no matter what their ethnicity or race, has this deep ancestry of pre-industrial life ways that are way more connected to the natural world,
Yes.
for sure. So, one thing I'm curious about that sort of branches off something you just said is how do you support someone who's very new to this work and a part of them is interested, but lots of parts of them are telling them this is too weird, this is too out there, it's probably not even real. You must encounter that a lot with clients.
I'm lucky. I get people that are very open because I'm very open, but I used to be an atheist and I used to be a scientist and I wanted to be, vet medicine. And so I was very closed. So I think because I've evolved so much, I meet people that are kind of where I'm at or maybe just behind, so to speak, in the opening system of the awakening around this. But I feel like I always talk to people who are very curious and very open and very excited about it, which is great. I don't get a lot of the skeptics. I have before. Um, and I'm not really here to like change any minds. I'm just here to help people cross the bridge when they're standing on one side of it going, "Hey, can you help walk me across this?" And I'm like, "Sure." So a lot of what it is I share personal stories. I can relate to being closed-minded because I was, somewhat as an atheist. It was just like everything's black and white. That's all that's here. There's nothing else going on but science, And I had so many of my own esoteric experiences, and things I couldn't explain that I had to start to dive into all this. But ultimately, I find that a lot of people come to me, they've already embraced yoga or Reiki, so they're somewhat open. But also that, at first there's a little bit of like, oh, I feel like I can finally share stories with you. And then some people will say to me, like, this is going to be really woo-woo. And I just laugh and I'm like, I have heard so much that I guarantee you it's not going to be that for me. And I'm also not going to judge it because I get really excited about hearing people's stories and what they've experienced. And there's still so much that I'm learning, but I love sending people to, I'm thinking a lot about these two books that I was in, but they're by Common Sentience, and one is on nature and the other is
Mm.
on animals. And they are stories of tons of people who have
Mm.
literally been out and seeing that there's so much wisdom in nature and animals, and they have their own specific stories. So when you start to realize that there are so many of these stories, it can open you to trusting and then experimenting with it. But I worked in vet medicine where they were very closed to animal communication, and I was the weird girl, and I really didn't care. But when I first came out of I called it the spiritual closet, I was scared. I was like, oh my God. I remember the New York Post called me a psychic and did an article on me, and I was so scared. I was like, no. And I call it the witch wound, but ultimately it's like, I can really dance between practicality and science and spirituality because of my background. And so I really just like to meet people where they're at, hear their story, hear where they want to go, and then kind of, we take baby steps. It's taken me a while to open to a lot of this. And now I'm like, okay, what don't I know that I can learn, right? I get excited about that edge,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, I love how you explained that often people are actually coming to you as a safe refuge rather than coming to you with a lot of skepticism. So far, we've talked mostly about horses, but you also do this work with goats and donkeys, right?
Yes.
Tell me about them.
Yeah, well, so the donkeys, I don't have one now, but I had one for a while. He was not mine,
Mm.
but they are incredible at grief work. Really, that's the story I have in this animals book that Dr. Stephen Farmer is into. It's like they are so good at helping with grief. And I believe part of that is their archetype of like carrying burdens and
Mhm.
carrying physical baggage for humans for so long. But there's something about how they are with grief where and I don't think donkeys have a little bit of that, like, ugh, get with the program. Horses do. Horses are a little like, oh my gosh, humans don't know so much. And sometimes they just, they still love us and they're patient, but sometimes they don't stay as patient. Whereas I've seen donkeys just go, I'm in it to win it with you. Like I'm not going to leave your side. I just want you to release this grief. And they're just so potent. And then the goats, it's so funny because my goats, I feel like are somewhat special because I've had them since birth. They're very protected and pure, and they've been doing this work since they were little. They started in goat yoga, but they are really powerful, like intentional beings that are about family and community and curiosity and bravery and courage. And so they teach different things than the horses, different qualities, but people just feel a lot of joy around them, and they do this thing where they love to be touched and scratched. So there's that constant like physical somatic connection with them. And it's a good flow of giving and receiving. And goats love pleasure. And so we have all these conversations around what would it be like if you were more curious at work or in life? And what would it be like if you know, really were braver and courageous and you just went for it and you wanted to explore and you didn't close yourself down and you stepped into receiving more pleasure. So we talk about all
Yeah.
those things.
Oh, I'm so intrigued. I've been looking to befriend a donkey and I haven't found one in my area, but I was spending some time with goats for a little while in the fall, and yeah, I was really drawn to them. So we have talked a little bit about what your sense is of what the animals are waiting for from us or hoping for. And I wonder if you want to go into that any more. The focus of this podcast is um, it's very solutions oriented, regeneratively focused, focused on what I call informed optimism. But I do acknowledge, of course, that environmentally our planet is in a tough spot. A lot of species are facing great difficulties. Human physical and mental health is very challenged, I think, by a lot of measurements. And simultaneously, a lot of really dynamic evolution and consciousness opening and growth and transformation is happening both in the natural world and among humans. So, in that context, or any other way you want to address it, is there more that you'd like to say about what the animals are waiting for from us?
I love this question. I do think they are waiting for us to be more heart-centered and leading with love, and from that space of interconnectedness and interdependence, and more honoring of them, honoring of ourselves, right? So asking permission, explaining, like I told my girls, hey, the farrier's coming today, be prepared, like I'm giving them a heads up. I tell them what's going to happen when, I'm giving them that explanation. I'm not just grabbing them and being like in my human world. Like, so it's a deeper honoring of them in a way where we see them truly as sentient beings. We see them as gifted with unique gifts, and each species has their own, I believe, and each individual has their own preferences, And so it's knowing to work with each of them and see what they want, Love, one of the reasons I love doing the animal communication work is that people come to me and they're like, what does my horse, or dog or cat want? Like, what would make them happier, and what can I do to support them? And or they'll say, will you talk to my animal? I'm going to be gone for a couple of weeks. They're not just leaving and, thinking everything's fine. They're actually realizing that's a relationship and there needs to be conscious communication. So I love that there are people waking up all over to how we can be more connected to and in tune to everything. I think in many ways, what we went through in the last couple of years was for a return to nature, because there was a lot of places we couldn't go. And then we could always go back to home, to Mother Earth, and be outside. And then there was also an opportunity for us to go back to what are the natural ways to keep our immune system healthy, right? And what are we in a process of regenerating through through knowing that we got sick, right? And if there is sickness and there's a fear of sickness, what creates health on a deep level and what sustains it,
Yeah.
and being out for me, it was like I had never realized just the sunlight and dirt were two of the most healing things I could ever do for my body. And I was so happy and knock on wood healthy for the last
Yeah.
couple of years because of that.
And contact with animals and their microbiomes, right? We've gotten into this sanitize everything mode. I mean, well, I don't do that in my household, but um, that's certainly become popular in Western or definitely US culture in the last 50 or 70 years. And really, what we need is to keep our own microbiomes healthy by contact with nature, including with animals, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that physical touch is really important. That is like, and that, when the Human Animal Bond Research Institute talks about if you pet a dog and what that does for your heart rate and what that does for cortisol, and 100% it's going to be the same with a goat or a horse. You just have even more fur, with a horse than you do with a goat and even with a dog. But yeah, there's a way I think for the animals to say, hey, we're all in this together. We're all connected.
Yes.
Remember that. Honor yourself, honor us, and lead from that place of abundance and interconnectedness rather than ego lack. I've got to get mine. We're not in a me society anymore. We're really in a we. And that's the most important thing I think they would want us to focus on, that the wisdom of stillness and our hearts and that the wisdom of interconnectedness can create the solutions that we need.
Yes, I love how you said that, especially the way that you emphasized how we need to be listening more, because I've come to see that as really crucial for humanity going ahead. So, one perception that I have of the kind of work that you do that is when it is equine partnered or um, partnered with any animal is that it's still not very accessible to a lot of people. So I'd like you to correct me if I'm wrong. Perhaps more people are experiencing this and able to access it than I realize. So that's part one of my question. And then part two is where would you like to see this kind of work, opportunity, human animal partnership blossom in coming decades?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the education needs to be there for it to start to go mainstream. And we're still working on the nomenclature as an industry. Like we're calling it equine assisted psychotherapy, equine assisted learning, which includes coaching, or even like yoga with horses. And then there's the whole therapeutic riding or hippotherapy. And
Yeah.
how each is different and may serve different types of clientele. But the cool thing is there are barns and ranches that do this work all over the United States and certainly all over the world. I learn about probably about 3 new ones a week right now, and I'm tracking them all the time and liking them on Facebook and supporting them. And so the good news is it's growing. There's a lot of more training programs now than there used to be as well. And, there's some places I think are going through insurance on the psychotherapy side, but, I think ultimately it becomes, I look at it as therapy on steroids, so to speak, right? Or healing that's exponential. So it's worth the investment, even if it's not covered through insurance. And it's one of those things where you can then, potentially even do less sessions than you would if you were to go to, a talk therapist every single week. So I think it's really worthy of the investment. And you can always Google where there are some in your local area as well. That said, there are things that are growing in terms of grants and funding for veterans and for, you know, um, sex trafficking and women who've been abused and like all different types of groups.
Yeah.
And for me, I've always wanted to do more on the corporate team building side so that I can then gift back to some of the groups that need to do this for low cost or no cost, right?
Right.
And I think that that's a great model that we can all have too, you know. But ultimately, I try to travel to different locations so that I'm accessible and the work is accessible. And it's funny because there are areas that want this a lot more than others that I've seen. Things fill up very quickly for me in California or on the East Coast, and Colorado is saturated right now. There's about 40 equine coaches in my area. And
Really?
yeah, I don't know if there's as much demand for that. So it's a
Oh, that's
very
so interesting.
yeah, it's one of the reasons I want to move because I want to be somewhere where I can serve more people. And you know, there seems to be it's very full here, you know. So I think it's really about like ideally different places are starting programs and then they're very successful because there haven't been a lot, and I'd say in the last 10 years, but it is growing now, which is good. And to answer your question on where I'd like to see it go, I would love to see definitely more funding for the programs that need it on the nonprofit side, who are really offering, you know, incredible programs. And then it's expensive to have horses and to have horse property
Yeah.
and to have insurance for this work. So it's really important, I think, that there are corporate groups that give back through sponsorship, different types of funding as well. And most importantly, I want to see the general public open up to the fact that you can learn from animals, you know, and that this may be the best thing to do with your team because corporate America is not fully bought in yet. They'd rather go take everyone out for drinks and bowling. And I'm like, you will have fun. And I'm all for having fun. But what if
Oh,
you could have fun and actually have something that completely changes your team in one session?
yeah.
And also you talk about for a long time.
Plus,
Um,
like, is drinks and bowling even fun? I mean, that's certainly not fun for me. So I think you've
Depends who
just
you
opened
ask.
up that question around, like, we have this idea that fun is drinks and bowling or whatever, but I bet there are a lot of people who, given the choice, they would rather go to your barn with their colleagues.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely something that I feel like it's a bit of a leap for some people to, you know, back to your question earlier, to buy into and understand that animals are teachers and then the next piece, animals are doing energy work, right? And that you can physically, emotionally feel better and have spiritual experiences with them and with nature. But I tend to look for the people that are already open and get it, and then you know they get excited and love it, and then they share about it. Almost always people are completely blown away the first time they try it. Every single time, people absolutely love it, are blown away, and are like, "Did that just happen?" And you know, so it's just getting people out for the first time is the biggest piece, and then letting it grow. But there are several of us that are trying our best to mainstream it. So thank you for giving it a voice and a platform today through your platform and through your audience, because that's really how it does grow, is us educating and sharing more. So
Yes.
I see more books, I see more films, I see more media really to kind of highlight, because the animals can't go do that themselves. They're not going and writing a book. They need us to do it for them.
Right.
So
Right. Yeah, it struck me as you were talking too that it's really delightful that there is such an element of fun and joy and play and warmth and nurturing and love when people connect with animals, because the underlying challenge aspect that I think a lot of humans are having some trouble working their way through is recognizing that if all this is true, if animals have these capacities, if they are healers, if they have this, kind of much more advanced intelligence and emotional capacity than we realized, then we're the ones who have to change our behaviors. And I see a lot of people feeling resistant toward that because now you can leap ahead with joy, as a lot of people are. But when you recognize that animals are so much more advanced and really are meant to be our partners, not our possessions, you then have to also recognize, oh, I have interacted with them or assumed things about them that were really not based in truth or reality or goodness or the way the relationship is supposed to be. So I think it's beautiful that there is so much joy and reward in the kind of work that you offer, because surely that helps people grow to this next level of partnership rather than domination.
Yeah, beautifully said. And honestly, a lot of what I think about is dismantling speciesism.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's really, if that's one of my big goals. And one of my mentors said that to me once. She goes, Kate, I don't know if the world's fully ready to even talk about speciesism. We're still talking about, Black Lives Matter and other things, that it's like, are we there? We're still in
We're
our human
trying to work
design.
it out among humans. Yeah.
Right. We're still
But
trying to work it out among humans, let alone our animals, right?
we can't wait. We can't wait
Agreed.
for perfect human relationships. I see
Agreed.
it more as um those endeavors are supportive. I don't see it the way your mentor did, because I think people have been very wise to point out that how we treat nature is how we treat other people, and how we treat other people is how we treat nature. So fantastic to be working on this among humans for social justice, racial justice, gender justice, and equity. But I also really believe, for someone like you, whose primary focus is the human animal relationship, that also helps mend human relationships.
Agreed.
Is that your experience?
I mean, I always say to everyone, like all relationships are a reflection of our relationship with ourself. And really, my work always just boils down to self-love and its simplicity and also profoundness. And that's really what the animals are teaching in many ways is like, hey, love and honor yourself, respect yourself, set healthy boundaries, do what you need to do for yourself. You will then do it with us, right? And we protect what we love. And you're right, we do have to face certain things that I know a lot of equestrians have to face how we grew up around horses, which was
Yes.
not always kind and, riding
Disciplinary.
completely.
Yeah.
It was all
Yeah.
about performance and perfectionism for me. And I had to unlearn quite a bit. I actually just wrote an article about like how much I had to unlearn when I started to do this work with horses, because I knew very early on that some of the training programs that were out there on how to partner with horses were still very dominance based. Like, let's run them around and see how your body's regulated. And I'm like, let's just see how your body's regulated. We don't need to run them around for that. Like, we don't need to cause stress in an animal so that you can learn. No, And my mare would be so upset when she would watch sessions like that someone else was facilitating. But it really became this whole, like I got put in my place very quickly by a very incredible horse that taught me, hey, this is not how we do things, in our world. And this is also not how you're going to do things moving forward. But we do have to really look at some uncomfortable parts of ourselves and how we show up and how we do one thing's how we do anything. And we see that with approaching a horse or an animal. But the good news is that people see that very quickly, want to change, and then they don't, at least in my work, I don't see people judge themselves for that long or feel bad for that long. They're just like,
Yeah.
oh, it's that whole once you know better, you'll do better. They're like, oh, now I know better. Okay. And then I love when clients come that are even more evolved than I am, because they're like, I was just thinking about this the other day. I had this young girl come once and she just looked into my thoroughbred's eyes that I have now. And she's like, where do you think she's been? What do you think has been her life story? Like, what is her eyes witness? And I'm just like, you can facilitate. I'm gonna watch you. Like, I was like, you get this so much more than even I hadn't even looked in my mare's eyes and thought those things. Like, and now I'm like, and then I just sat and had such a new appreciation for her, like where she walked and what has she done and and like we don't often even pause to think that about anyone else, right? And like I think it was Course in Miracles that says, like, if we knew everyone's story and we knew everyone's upbringing, we would never judge them. We would understand why they are the way they are and why they react or treat, the world and themselves. Doesn't mean that it's excused, but it's explained to a certain level. But yeah, I love it too when people come and like show me ways of being in the human animal bond, or they're experiencing new levels of the human animal bond that I am then like, this is the next level. We can keep up leveling from here.
Well, and I appreciate you said it that way because it reminds me of something I've been writing about lately too, which is the reminder for all of us that sure, this type of, say, human animal learning can be a little bit or even a significant stretch for people. But what's on the other side is so much joy, so much connection, so much well being mentally, physically, and spiritually for humanity and animals and the whole natural world. I often think that, and some people are kind of living this new earth bliss already, but right in front of us right now is the possibility of this gorgeous existence that any of us can step into at any time, where we're living in these incredibly rich and beautiful egalitarian relationships that totally leave speciesism behind and are just full of rewards.
Beautiful. Yes. Yes. And when you really tune in meditation with them and with the goats too, they will always say, all is well. Like in this space, everything you need is here. Like there's nothing else to do or to have or to change. Like they have a lot of compassion and understanding of that all is well energy and how to return to that parasympathetic where we can just be with what is and not have to like be so hard on ourselves, and so I love that for so many people that I work with that are recovering perfectionists and myself included, where the horses do especially have a lot of compassion for us, and they remind us, hey, just breathe and feel your feet. And I remember once I was processing some anger, and the goats were just like, hey, like everything's okay. Just come back to the natural cycle of things. And I'm like, oh yeah, is this anger even a natural cycle for me, or am I creating this through story in my head? And I went, oh yeah, I just can let this go right now, right? And like be in the moment. And the animals just receive what's already there, and we get to do that too. And I think that creates a more internal happiness that's sustainable rather than this like, let me get stuff from the outside. So we don't need to consume as much, when we're out in nature, and we realize like a lot of what we're seeking is that inner world. It's right there inside of us that nature and the animals bring us to. And then we have less of like consumerism and all that. So everything just can move together and sync really well when we kind of get out of our own ways and out of our egos. I think that's really what the animals want so much for us, is to come out of that egoic mindset where we think we know better, we think we have to know it all, or we think we have to do it all.
Right, right. And I think, humans can realize that's actually an exhausting charade to be trying to maintain, whereas the partnership model is richer, more joyful, more life-sustaining, more fun, more beautiful.
Yeah. And they all live in community. Everything in nature is in community, right? I mean, you get a lone wolf and a lone coyote. Sometimes I see it, but like for the most part, they're still, and who knows if they're lone or they're just out hunting and they're going back. But like everything's connected. I was watching two trees yesterday, and they grew to be the exact mirror of each other, and they're connected at the top. I call them like the twin flame tree. But yeah, there's just so much that is already there in community that we can learn from. I think we need to start mapping, really looking at mapping like nature systems. This year was the first year that I heard multiple people say, hey, Kate, I was realizing that like in winter, people rest and they don't like hustle, and they just, have that time where they hibernate. And I'm like, thank you for listening. As you said earlier, listening is the key word here with all of this. listening to nature and winter's wisdom, because that's what, that's what we need to practice right now. And I saw some of my clients like go run, marathons in December, and I'm like, no, like and now we're gonna all burn out, right? We have to
Well, so
get
many
back.
people have.
Correct. Right. Yeah. So if we need sustainability, we have to look at the solutions that are already right in front of our face. And that's literally walking outside and seeing, the horses hold the key in the map, I believe, to a lot of the solutions for us to have joy and fulfillment. And then nature holds it in terms of how we can be and create and, to your word, regenerate, right?
Yes, for sure. Kate, I just love the work you're doing, and it's such a pleasure to hear more about it in detail. Is there anything else that you want to share with us today, or do you feel like we're coming to a good natural close?
We are. The only thing I felt inspired to do, if you're open to it, is to pull a card from the card deck for the horses.
Oh,
I
do.
felt I felt like it'd be interesting to see. I meant to have this next to me, so thanks for. I just felt like, well, for the audience, and especially for the School of Humans and Earth, which I love, is such a beautiful name. And for those listening, what is something that they can really embrace more of from the wisdom
Yes.
of the horses, since we've talked about that? So we'll see what comes forward.
Wonderful idea.
Woo! Oh, this is such a good one. So it's the pleasure card. Yeah, and that is in so many ways that, and I love that, there's a flow of giving and receiving here, between this woman and this horse, and then there's a circle of like nature and birds and blue skies, and realizing like, hey, that's actually how we can have healthy air quality when we realize that our body is birthright. I just did a video on this the other day with my goat, like our body's birthright is to feel good, right? And how have we gotten so far away from that we all are like used to back pain, or we're used to this suffering that we just don't need. So what I feel like I'm going to do is just read the first words from the booklet from the horses, which is life has to feel good. Being in our bodies is wonderful when we feel good. Each moment we can seek pleasure, and it raises our vibration. Humans can smile, but we may quiver a lip or squeal in delight. This is from the horses. They wrote this. We lay in the sun and we softly enjoy eating our food and how it nourishes us. Humans need to value pleasure more. I love that.
So nice. So nice. It's a deeply valuable message for a human culture that has leaned way too far into perfectionism, workaholism, accepting pain, suffering, and stress. So thanks to the horses for that, and to you for making the card deck with them.
Yeah, thank you. It's been fun. It's been fun to do it.
I bet. So our listeners can find you at kateneligan.com. Is that the main place for them to look for you? And there's also a Facebook group?
Yeah, Awakening with Equines is our Facebook group, and then I'm on Instagram and Facebook as Kate Neligan, Awakening with Equines, Kate Neligan Equine Coach. You can find me there.
So nice. Thank you for spending this time with us, Kate. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for the work you're doing. It's important.
Thank you for listening to Humans and Earth. Please share this episode to broaden engagement in the regeneration our world needs. You'll find social media links in the show notes. To explore our other offerings, visit www.humansandearth.com.